Sean Connery's ribs were actually cracked during filming. For 56 brutal days, Sidney Lumet did not just direct The Hill, he recreated a military prison's torture on his own cast. But what happens when exposing institutional cruelty requires inflicting real cruelty? This 1965 masterpiece was built on genuine suffering, real injuries, and methods, so extreme Connery refused to speak to Lumet for decades. What you are watching isn't acting. It is documented survival. Number 20. The Bond star who wanted to destroy his image. Sean Connery arrived in Spain as the most famous actor in the world. He had just completed Thunderball, the fourth James Bond film. He was synonymous with sophistication, charm, and effortless heroism. Then he chose to star in The Hill, a film that would require him to be beaten, humiliated, stripped nearly naked, and covered in filth for 8 weeks. This was not career strategy. It was rebellion. Connery had grown to hate Bond. He felt trapped by the character, typecast as a cartoon superhero when he wanted to be taken seriously as an actor. When Sidney Lumet offered him the role of Joe Roberts, a broken soldier being tortured in a military prison, Connery saw it as the perfect antidote to 007. He would be unglamorous, vulnerable, defeated. Everything Bond was not. But Connery did not understand what Lumet's authenticity would actually require. When he arrived in Almeria and saw the detention camp set, the artificial hill constructed in the desert, and learned Lumet's plan for filming, he reportedly turned to his agent and said, "What the fuck have I signed up for?" His agent had no answer. Connery was contractually committed to a production that would physically destroy him. Number 19. The hill that was actually deadly. Production designer Herbert Smith built an artificial hill in the Almeria desert, matching specifications for the punishment structures used in actual British military detention camps. 60 feet high, constructed from sand and rocks at a 45-degree incline. Prisoners would be forced to run up and down this hill repeatedly in full pack as punishment. Smith made his replica authentic in every detail, including one crucial element. It was genuinely dangerous to climb. The loose sand and rocks shifted under weight. The angle was steep enough that climbers would occasionally lose footing and fall. During construction, 2 Spanish workers were injured falling from the hill. One suffered a broken wrist, the other cracked 3 ribs. The production safety officer recommended installing handrails or safety lines. Lumet refused. Real prisoners in real detention camps had no safety equipment. Neither would his actors. When the cast first saw The Hill, veteran actor Ian Hendry, who had military experience, told Lumet it was a death trap. Lumet's response was documented by a production assistant. "Good, I want you terrified of it." Over the course of filming, every principal actor would fall from that hill at least once. Several would be injured. All would develop a genuine fear of climbing it. That fear is visible in every frame. Number 18, the director who weaponized the sun. Sidney Lumet scheduled all the hill climbing sequences to film during the hottest part of the day. Temperatures in Almeria during June and July 1965 regularly exceeded 105 degrees Fahrenheit. The artificial hill, with no shade and reflecting heat from sand and rocks, was even hotter. Surface temperatures on the hill reached 130 degrees. Lumet wanted this. He studied historical records of British military detention camps in North Africa and learned that punishment details were conducted during peak heat to maximize suffering. He would replicate that exactly. The actors were required to wear heavy military uniforms and carry full packs weighing approximately 40 pounds. Then they would run up and down the hill repeatedly while Lumet filmed from multiple angles. Between takes, they received minimal water. Lumet implemented the same water restriction protocol Thompson had used on Ice Cold in Alex, limiting fluid intake to create visible dehydration. By the second week of filming, all 5 principal actors showed clinical signs of heat exhaustion. Sean Connery lost 17 pounds in the first 3 weeks. His famous physique, maintained for Bond films through careful diet and exercise, melted away. The muscular secret agent became a gaunt prisoner. Lumet was delighted. The transformation was perfect. Number 17. The actor who collapsed and was forced to continue. Ossie Davis, the American actor cast as Jacko King, was 52 years old during filming. He was the oldest member of the principal cast and the least accustomed to extreme physical demands. During the filming of a punishment sequence in late June, Davis ran the hill 17 times in 2 hours. The temperature was 108 degrees. On the 18th climb, he collapsed halfway up the hill. He tumbled backward, sliding roughly 15 feet down the incline before stopping. The medic rushed to him. Davis was conscious but disoriented, showing clear signs of heat stroke. His core body temperature was dangerously elevated. The medic recommended immediate cessation of filming and emergency cooling treatment. Lumet approached Davis as he lay in the sand. He knelt beside him and, according to multiple witnesses, said this: "Ossie, I need you to do it one more time." The camera angle was wrong. Davis, barely coherent, initially refused. Lumet waited. 5 minutes passed, 10 minutes. Finally, Lumet made it simple. "Do you want me to recast the role? Because if you can't continue, I'll need to start over with someone else. All your work will be wasted." Davis knew what this meant. Weeks of suffering would count for nothing. His performance would be discarded. He struggled to his feet and climbed the hill one more time. The footage of that final climb, with Davis stumbling and barely making it to the top, is in the final film. It is one of the most powerful moments in the movie. It is also documented evidence of a man being pushed beyond safe physical limits. Number 16. The punishment that was real. The film's most disturbing sequences show the prisoners being subjected to systematic abuse by the staff sergeants, particularly the sadistic Williams, played by Ian Hendry. The verbal abuse, the physical punishments, the deliberate humiliation. Audiences assumed this was carefully choreographed performance. It was not. Lumet instructed Ian Hendry and Ian Bannon, who played the two staff sergeants, to treat the prisoner actors exactly as their characters would, not just during filmed scenes, but continuously throughout the production day. When cameras were not rolling, Hendry and Bannon were ordered to remain in character, addressing the other actors with contempt, barking orders, maintaining the power dynamic. The psychological impact was immediate and severe. Sean Connery, accustomed to being treated with deference as an international star, found himself being screamed at by actors playing prison guards, between takes, during meals, walking across the set. The abuse was constant. After 1 week, Connery confronted Lumet, demanding the humiliation stop when cameras were not rolling. Lumet refused. The authenticity required total immersion. Connery considered leaving the production. His contract attorney examined the agreement and found no grounds for breach that would not result in massive financial penalties. Connery stayed, but he developed a genuine animosity toward Hendry and Bannon that took years to dissipate. Number 15. The prison camp consultant who tried to stop it. Lumet hired Colonel James Barrington, a retired British Army officer who had served in military detention facilities during and after World War II, as technical consultant. Barrington's job was ensuring the detention camp procedures shown in the film matched historical reality. But when Barrington visited the set in early June and observed actual filming conditions, he was horrified. He told Lumet that what was happening exceeded anything that had occurred in real British military prisons. The systematic abuse shown in the film was based on documented incidents, but those incidents had resulted in courts-martial and reforms. Real British military detention, while harsh, had rules. Guards who behaved like the film's Williams character would have been disciplined. Lumet was creating a fantasy of unlimited abuse that misrepresented actual British military justice. Barrington wrote a formal letter to the production stating that the film risked defaming the British Army by suggesting systematic torture was standard procedure. Lumet read the letter and fired Barrington as consultant. The film would proceed without military approval. Years later, when the Ministry of Defense was asked about the Hill, their official response was that it bore minimal resemblance to actual British military detention procedures and should be understood as dramatic exaggeration. Lumet never corrected this record. He let audiences believe they were seeing accurate historical recreation when they were actually seeing his amplified nightmare version. Number 14. The water torture scene that wasn't simulated. One of the film's most brutal moments shows a prisoner being forced to stand in the sun while water is poured over his head, then denied actual drinking water. The combination of seeing water, feeling it on your skin, but being prevented from drinking creates psychological torture. When Lumet filmed this scene, he decided simulation was not enough. He wanted authentic desperation. Actor Alfred Lynch, playing prisoner George Stevens, had not been allowed to drink water for 4 hours before the scene. His thirst was real. When the staff sergeant character poured water over his head during the scene, Lynch's reaction was genuine anguish. The water was cool, his body desperately needed hydration, and he could not drink. The scene required 7 takes. Each time, water was poured over Lynch while he was denied drinking. By the final take, Lynch was crying. Not acting crying, actually weeping from frustration and desperate thirst. Lumet called cut, and Lynch immediately grabbed the water bucket and drank directly from it, consuming nearly a 1 gallon before the medic intervened. The performance in that scene earned critical praise for its emotional authenticity. Critics had no idea they were watching actual torture. Number 13. The fight scene that sent two actors to hospital. The climactic confrontation between Roberts and Williams required a violent physical fight. Lumet wanted it to look genuinely brutal, not like choreographed movie fighting, so he instructed Sean Connery and Ian Hendry to actually fight. Not full force, but with real contact. No pulling punches, no safety precautions beyond trying not to cause permanent injury. The two actors, both already harboring genuine resentment from weeks of psychological abuse, welcomed the opportunity for controlled violence. The scene was filmed in one long take with a handheld camera following the action. Connery and Hendry threw real punches. Both connected. Hendry's nose was broken by Connery's elbow during a grapple. Blood poured down his face. Lumet kept filming. Connery took a punch to his ribs that cracked one of them. He kept fighting. The sequence lasted approximately 4 minutes before Lumet finally called cut. Both actors were bleeding, bruised, and injured. Both were transported to a hospital in Almeria for treatment. Hendry's nose required resetting. Connery's rib was wrapped. They returned to the set the next day and completed additional scenes showing the aftermath of the fight. The visible injuries were real, so no makeup was required. When the film premiered, critics praised the fight scene as the most realistic combat ever filmed. They were correct. It was real combat. Number 12, the method acting that became mental illness. Roy Kinnear, playing the gentle prisoner Monty Bartlett, took his role with complete seriousness. He researched prisoners who had experienced military detention, spoke with veterans who had been through the system, and committed to total authenticity. Then he made a catastrophic decision. He decided to remain in character throughout the entire production, even when cameras were not rolling. For 8 weeks, Kinnear spoke only as Monty. He slept in his costume. He ate prison rations the production had prepared to match what actual detainees received. He refused to break character even when returning to his hotel at night. His wife visited the set during the 4th week. She later told friends that Roy did not recognize her immediately. When he finally did, he spoke to her in Monty's voice, using Monty's vocabulary. She left Spain after 2 days, disturbed by her husband's psychological state. By week 6, crew members reported that Kinnear seemed confused about his actual identity. He would sometimes refer to himself as Monty in casual conversation. He showed signs of dissociative behavior. The production psychologist, who had been hired by the insurance company to monitor cast mental health, recommended Kinnear receive immediate psychiatric evaluation. Lumet overruled this, stating that Kinnear's performance was brilliant and interrupting it would damage the film. Kinnear completed filming still partially trapped in character. It took him 4 months of therapy after production wrapped to fully separate himself from Monty Bartlett. Number 11, the Spanish workers who were treated like props. The film required dozens of extras to play additional prisoners. Rather than hiring British actors, the production recruited local Spanish men from Almeria. These extras were paid approximately 200 pesetas per day, roughly equivalent to £1.50, a fraction of what British extras would have received, but the real exploitation was how they were treated on set. The Spanish extras were subjected to the same brutal hill-climbing punishment as the principal actors, but with even less care for their well-being. They received minimal water, no access to the production medic, and no rest between takes. Several collapsed from heat exhaustion during filming. When this happened, they were simply replaced with fresh extras. No medical treatment was provided beyond basic first aid. One Spanish extra, a man named Miguel Fernandez, suffered a severe ankle injury falling from the hill. He was given ice and told to rest. Production paid him for the day and sent him home. Weeks later, still unable to walk properly, Fernandez sought treatment at a local hospital where doctors discovered his ankle had been fractured. It had healed incorrectly, leaving him with a permanent limp. He contacted the production requesting compensation for medical costs and lost work. The production's Spanish legal representative offered him 5,000 pesetas, approximately 37 pounds. Fernandez accepted because he had no resources to pursue legal action. Decades later, when researchers interviewed former extras from the Hill production, Fernandez was one of several who described being treated like disposable labor rather than human beings. Number 10. The screenplay that predicted reality. Ray Rigby's screenplay was based on his own experiences in a British military detention camp during World War II. He had witnessed abuse, though not to the extremes depicted in the film. But here is what is rarely discussed. Several incidents in the screenplay that seemed like dramatic exaggeration had actually happened in British military prisons, though they had been covered up. the character of Staff Sergeant Williams, a sadistic guard who tortures prisoners, was based on a composite of real guards Rigby had encountered. The death of a prisoner from heat stroke after being forced to run the hill repeatedly had occurred at a camp in Egypt in 1943. The incident was documented in a classified military inquiry that concluded the death was accidental. No charges were filed. The verbal and physical abuse shown throughout the film matched testimony from dozens of former detainees who had filed complaints with military authorities. Those complaints had been systematically dismissed or minimized. When The Hill was released, the Ministry of Defense claimed it was exaggerated fiction. But when researchers decades later obtained declassified documents through Freedom of Information requests, they discovered something disturbing. Almost every abuse shown in the film had actually occurred in British military detention facilities. Rigby had not exaggerated. He had understated. The real camps had been worse. Number 9. The cinematographer who documented everything. Oswald Morris, the legendary cinematographer, filmed The Hill in stark black and white that emphasized the brutal heat and harsh conditions. His visual approach created an almost documentary feeling, as if the camera was simply recording reality rather than creating fiction. This was not aesthetic choice, it was ethical documentation. Morris had served in the Royal Air Force during World War II. He had strong opinions about military justice and the treatment of enlisted men. When he read Rigby's screenplay, he saw an opportunity to expose a system he considered fundamentally corrupt. Morris kept a detailed journal throughout production, documenting not just his cinematographic choices, but everything happening on set. The injuries, the heat exhaustion, Lumet's methods, the exploitation of Spanish extras. His journal entries from June and July 1965 read less like production notes and more like war correspondence. Day 23, Connery collapsed again. Lumet gave him 10 minutes, then demanded another take. This isn't filmmaking. It's something else. Day 31. The Spanish extras are being treated like animals. Nobody cares if they get hurt. Morris's journal was preserved in his personal papers and has never been published. Researchers who have accessed it describe it as one of the most disturbing accounts of film production they have encountered. Morris apparently considered making his documentation public, but ultimately decided his loyalty to the film and his colleagues outweighed his moral objections. He took the secrets of The Hill's production to his grave. Number 8. The death threat Lumet received and ignored. 2 weeks into production, Lumet received an anonymous letter at his hotel. The letter, written in English but with Spanish phrasing, threatened violence if filming continued. The writer claimed to be a relative of one of the injured Spanish extras and stated that Lumet was exploiting local workers. The letter promised consequences if production did not improve working conditions and increase pay for Spanish crew members. Lumet showed the letter to the production manager and the head of security. Both recommended taking it seriously, possibly contacting local police. Lumet refused. He considered it an empty threat designed to extort money. He increased security around himself but made no changes to working conditions or pay. 3 days later, Lumet's car was vandalized in the hotel parking lot. All 4 tires were slashed and a rock had been thrown through the windshield. Spanish police investigated but made no arrests. Lumet hired a bodyguard and continued as before. No further incidents occurred, but several crew members later reported that the tension between the production and local workers remained high throughout filming. Some Spanish extras quit rather than continue under the brutal conditions. Others stayed because they needed the money, but the resentment was palpable. Lumet never publicly discussed the threats or the vandalism. He maintained the position that The Hill's production had been difficult but professional. Number 7. The Bond comparison Connery could not escape. Thunderball was released in December 1965, 5 months after The Hill completed filming but before The Hill's theatrical release. Sean Connery attended the Thunderball premiere looking gaunt and exhausted. He had regained only some of the weight he had lost in Spain. Journalists noticed immediately. At the press conference, a reporter asked why he looked so different from previous Bond films. Connery tried to explain he had been filming another role that required significant physical transformation. The reporter persisted. "You look terrible. Are you ill?" Connery snapped. "I look like someone who's been through hell because I have been through hell." But it wasn't Bond. Bond is a fucking holiday compared to what I just did. The quote was sanitized in most British press coverage, but the exchange revealed Connery's psychological state. The Hill had damaged him in ways Bond never could. Bond required charm and athleticism. The Hill required genuine suffering. When The Hill was finally released in June 1966, critics repeatedly compared it to Connery's Bond work, noting how dramatically different the performances were. Several reviewers suggested Connery was proving his range. What they did not understand was that Connery was not acting in The Hill, he was surviving it. Years later, Connery would say that The Hill was the hardest film he ever made and that Lumet was the most demanding director he ever worked with. He meant it as a compliment to Lumet's artistry, but crew members who heard him say this knew it was not really praise. It was trauma acknowledgement. Number 6, the military screening that almost caused a riot. Before The Hill's general release, the producers arranged a special screening for British military personnel and veterans. The screening took place at a military base in southern England in May 1966. Approximately 300 servicemen attended. The response was immediate and divided. Some veterans, particularly those who had experienced military detention, stood and applauded at the end. They felt the film accurately depicted an abusive system that needed exposure. But others, particularly career officers and senior enlisted men, were furious. They saw the film as defamation of the British military, showing British soldiers as sadistic monsters. During the question period after the screening, a retired colonel stood and accused Lumet, who was not present, of treasonous propaganda. He argued that showing British military personnel torturing prisoners gave comfort to Britain's enemies and dishonored men who had served honorably. A heated argument erupted between the colonel and former detainees who insisted the film was accurate. The argument escalated into near physical confrontation before military police intervened. The screening ended in chaos. The Ministry of Defense issued a statement distancing itself from the film and reiterating that The Hill did not represent standard British military procedure. But the controversy generated publicity that helped the film's commercial prospects. The harder the military establishment pushed back, the more the public wanted to see what had caused such outrage. Number 5. The editor who saved the film from Lumet. Thelma Connell edited The Hill under extremely difficult circumstances. Lumet had shot the film almost entirely in sequence, which meant she could not assemble scenes out of order. But the bigger problem was that Lumet had shot minimal coverage. Most scenes had only 1 or 2 camera angles. This gave Connell almost no flexibility in the editing room. She was essentially locked into Lumet's vision with no ability to restructure or reimagine the material. When Connell received the footage and began assembly, she realized something disturbing. Lumet had captured genuinely brutal material that crossed from drama into documentation of abuse. Some shots were so violent, so clearly showing actors in genuine distress, that Connell believed they could not be included in the final film. She presented her concerns to Lumet, identifying approximately 8 minutes of footage she considered too extreme. Lumet's response was to demand every frame remain. Connell argued that the most brutal material would get the film banned or rated adults only, limiting its commercial potential. She also argued that some shots exploited the actor's genuine suffering in ways that felt unethical. Lumet was unmoved. Connell made a decision. She edited 2 versions of the film. One matched Lumet's demands exactly. The other removed the most extreme moments while preserving the narrative's brutality. She showed both to the producers. They chose her version, overruling Lumet. The version audiences saw was Connell's ethical cut, not Lumet's exploitation cut. The removed footage still exists in archives, sealed and unavailable for viewing. Connell later described it as some of the most disturbing material she ever worked with. Number 4. The critics who refused to review it. When The Hill premiered in London in June 1966, several prominent British film critics refused to review it. Their stated reason was that the film's content was too disturbing for recommendation to general audiences. But the real reason, revealed in private correspondence later made public, was more complicated. These critics believed The Hill was so brutal, so unrelentingly harsh, that reviewing it favorably would make them complicit in what they saw as exploitation cinema. One critic, writing to a colleague, stated, "Lumet has made a film that tortures its audience as thoroughly as the characters torture each other. I cannot in good conscience tell people to subject themselves to this." Another wrote, "This is not entertainment. It is ordeal. I review films, not endurance tests." The refusals created a mini controversy in British film criticism. Other critics accused their colleagues of cowardice, arguing that The Hill was exactly the kind of challenging, important film that required serious critical engagement. The debate played out in film, journals, and newspapers for weeks. Eventually, enough critics did review the film that the refusals became footnotes. But the incident revealed something significant about The Hill's impact. It was so brutal that experienced critics who had watched countless violent films could not process it through normal critical frameworks. It had exceeded the boundaries of what film criticism could comfortably evaluate. Number 3. The remake that was secretly developed. In 1978, a Hollywood producer attempted to develop an American remake of The Hill. The pitch was straightforward: relocate the story to an American military prison during Vietnam, cast major American stars, and soften some of the more extreme brutality for mainstream audiences. When Sidney Lumet learned about this proposal, he threatened legal action. His contract gave him creative control that he interpreted as blocking any remakes without his approval. The producer argued that Lumet did not own the underlying rights. Those belonged to the estate of Ray Rigby, the original screenwriter. A legal battle ensued that lasted nearly 2 years. During depositions, disturbing details about The Hill's production emerged. Testimony from cast and crew members described the brutal filming conditions, the injuries, the exploitation of Spanish extras. The producer attempting the remake used this testimony to argue that Lumet's film was so unethically produced that he had forfeited moral authority to block a remake. The case was eventually settled out of court with confidentiality agreements. The remake was never made, but the legal discovery process had created a permanent record of The Hill's production methods. That record was sealed as part of the settlement and has never been fully disclosed. Researchers have accessed portions through various legal mechanisms, but significant details remain classified under the settlement's terms. What exists suggests the full truth about The Hill's production would be even more disturbing than what is publicly known. Number 2, the veteran who died watching it. In September 1966, a former British Army sergeant named Robert Mitchell attended a screening of The Hill at a cinema in Manchester. Mitchell had served in North Africa during World War II and had spent 3 months in a military detention camp in 1943 for striking an officer. The experience had traumatized him. He had never discussed it with his family, never sought treatment for what would now be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. He attended The Hill alone, not telling his wife where he was going. Approximately 60 minutes into the film, during one of the most brutal punishment sequences, Mitchell suffered a massive heart attack. Other patrons noticed him slumped in his seat and alerted staff. An ambulance was called, but Mitchell was pronounced dead at the scene. His widow later discovered correspondence in his personal effects indicating he had read about The Hill and specifically gone to see it despite knowing it would disturb him. She believed he had been seeking some form of catharsis or validation for his own experience. Instead, the film killed him. Number 1. The truth Lumet admitted only once. Sidney Lumet gave hundreds of interviews about The Hill throughout his career. He discussed his artistic intentions, his directorial approach, his commitment to realism, but only once, in an unpublished interview conducted in 1997 for an oral history project at the American Film Institute, did he tell the complete truth about what he had done. The interviewer asked about his most difficult production. Lumet paused for nearly 30 seconds before responding. The transcript records his answer. The Hill was not difficult. It was immoral. I knew what I was doing to those actors. I knew the conditions were dangerous. I knew I was pushing human beings past safe limits. I did it anyway because I convinced myself that the story justified the methods, that exposing institutional brutality required inflicting actual brutality. I was wrong. I made a good film through bad means, and I've never fully reconciled that. Sean Connery still won't speak to me. He's right not to. I hurt him. I hurt all of them. The film exists and people find value in it, but the cost was too high. If I could go back, I would make it differently, but I can't. So I live with what I did. The Hill proved that authentic suffering produces authentic art, but suffering remains suffering, regardless of the achievement. Lumet never answered whether the trade-off was worth it. The actors with permanent scars have their answer. The film remains. The cost remains. Now you decide, does the end justify the means? Let me know in the comments below.